Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something bigger than just day-to-day politics.
Right.
We're really trying to dissect a structural conflict that you see playing out in, well, democracies everywhere. And that's this deep tension between, raw populist mobilization on one side and the quiet, maybe unglamorous power of technocratic credibility on the other.
And we're using Canadian politics as really the perfect case study for this, specifically the just extraordinary and frankly unexpected rise of Mark Carney.
Right.
So the central thesis we're working with here is the struggle, the malaise of the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre. It reflects this really asymmetric challenge. Anti-elite rhetoric it's incredibly effective for rallying a base.
Absolutely.
But it just slams into a very hard electoral ceiling when it's confronted by a compelling show of, actual governing competence, especially when voters are stressed.
And our sources, which are compiled as of December 2025, they show a political landscape that's been completely rewired. We had this huge liberal resurgence under Carney, a guy whose credentials are, global managing two G7 central banks, but who had absolute zero prior electoral experience.
None.
And here's the immediate consequence, the thing that matters right now. After multiple very high-profile conservative defections, the Liberals are now just one single seat short of a majority government.
It's a profound shift. To go from a struggling party to being one floor crossing away from a majority, it just speaks volumes about the confidence voters and now politicians are placing in Carney's brand of stable, expert-led governance.
It's a very strange moment.
It is.
So that's the core question for you today. Why did a leader who had never even won a local election, who had never faced voters before, become prime minister and gain this kind of traction so quickly?
Well, what our sources suggest is the answer lies in timing and the strategic advantage of competence in a crisis. Okay, let's unpack this rise because the speed is genuinely stunning. Carney's path to the prime minister's office is, it's unprecedented in Canadian history.
It really is.
The Liberals, desperate for a reset, they choose him as leader on March 9th, 2025. And it was overwhelming, 85.9% of the vote on the first ballot. And then not even a week later, he's sworn in as prime minister. That timeline just defies every conventional political playbook.
It does, but his background gave him an immediate gravitas that sort of transcended normal politics. The speed worked because of his credentials.
Which are all about stability?
All about navigating global instability. Think about it. He was governor of the Bank of Canada, and crucially, he was appointed to that job by Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper back in 2008.
Then he goes on to lead the Bank of England. So that means he managed two G7 economies through the 2008 financial crash, and then later through all the painful adjustments of Brexit. This isn't just theory. It's a resume built on proven crisis management.
And this is where the specific context in North America just changed everything. Our analysts kept pointing to what they call the Trump dividend.
Ah, yes.
The April 2025 election, it just suddenly morphed into a referendum on one question. Who can best handle President Trump's economic nationalism? We're talking steep tariffs, actual threats to make Canada the 51st state.
And that kind of external sort of existential threat, it completely changes the political math overnight. It triggers a deep defensive nationalism.
Yeah.
Voters weren't just looking for someone to complain about inflation, they were looking for a shield. And this framed technocratic competence, the ability to handle trade, currency, diplomacy, it framed it as a patriotic necessity.
So Carney gets this instant legitimacy. He's seen as the only one who can really handle the chaos from south of the border.
Exactly.
And the data just shows how decisive that was. It helped the Liberals close an almost 20-point gap with the Conservatives in just a few weeks. The result? A minority government, 169 seats of vote share they hadn't seen since 1980.
And beyond the sheer numbers, his favorability ratings show he can operate outside of those partisan lines. He leads Poilievre in net favorability by an astonishing 39 points.
39.
But it's the cross-partisan appeal that's really remarkable. He's got high favorability with NDP voters, 61%, and Bloc voters, 52%. Think about that. He's popular with Quebec nationalists and social democrats.
Wait, doesn't that just suggest he's a moderate? What makes him different from just another popular liberal rather than a uniquely effective technocrat?
That's a crucial question. The difference is where that popularity comes from. It seems to be rooted in trust in his ability to get things done, not in his ideology.
Okay.
And look at this specific demographic that really jumped out at me in the research. Carney's net favorability among young men is 35 points higher than Poilievre's. This is a group that, in theory, should be drawn to an anti-establishment populist message. But they are overwhelmingly leaning toward the former central banker. They're prioritizing competence over disruption.
And he immediately used that credibility to pull off a policy move of really political genius. The sources call it technocratic pragmatism. Let's talk about the carbon tax shift.
It was brilliant. Poilievre's entire campaign was built around one slogan, axe the tax. So Carney's move was to eliminate the consumer carbon tax almost immediately, and that just instantly neutralized Poilievre's main attack line.
So he took the populist wind right out of the conservative sail.
Exactly. But, and this is the key part, he did it while keeping the industrial carbon pricing mechanisms. He showed he could adapt, he could listen to political reality, but he wasn't abandoning the core policy goal.
It's a perfect example of using technical skill for a political objective.
Precisely.
The reason he could do that, though, is because of the strategic hole Pierre Poilievre has dug for himself.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this paradox of his leadership. He's been incredibly good at mobilizing the right-wing base, getting over 40% of the popular vote. But he still failed to form a government. He consolidated the right. He basically crushed the People's Party. But the analysts argue that in succeeding at that, he created an absolute ceiling for himself.
And that's the structural constraint. Populism thrives on emotion, on validating grievances, and Poilievre is a master at that. But when voters are looking at these complex risks, housing, inflation, trade threats, they suddenly pivot to prioritizing competence.
So his political success actually created a structural electoral failure. And this constraint comes right from the Canadian center.
Absolutely. The center is everything. The research shows a plurality of Canadians, 38%, call themselves somewhere in the middle. At the same time, 45% describe the Conservatives as too far to the right. This creates what political scientists call the median voter displacement problem. Poilievre's brand, which is perfectly tuned for his base, is simultaneously pushing away the swing voters he needs to win. He's only talking to the 40%, not the 51%.
And that ceiling is now causing some real internal pressure. The sources note a big dip in support for Poilievre's leadership among his own voters, falling from 68% in August to just 58% in December.
Yeah.
Is 58% truly a crisis? I mean, it's still a majority of his own voters.
It's a huge issue, especially with the timing. That drop is happening right before a mandatory leadership review by secret ballot at the convention in Calgary.
Right, in January.
And the history here is loud. Our sources remind us that Joe Clark resigned back in '83 after getting 67% support. A 10-point drop in 4 months is a very dangerous trend. The question is, does the party accept that 41% ceiling?
And we don't even have to wait for the convention to see the results of this. We have the defections. Conservative MPs Chris d'Entremont and Michael Ma both crossed the floor.
And their statements were so targeted, they weren't just vague complaints. Both of them explicitly cited Carney's steady, practical approach and a desire to focus on solutions, not division.
They're essentially choosing competence over ideology.
Exactly. And as one anonymous strategist put it, MPs are leaving because Poilievre has made the conservative tent uninhabitable for moderates.
It just confirms the core idea. When things get complex, people want someone who looks like they can actually, run the country. So is Carney just an anomaly, or is there a global template for this? Italy gives us a pretty fascinating, if limited, parallel with Mario Draghi.
Draghi is an essential analogy here. He was the former head of the European Central Bank, the whatever it takes guy.
Right.
And his credibility was so overwhelming that it basically forced these hostile populist parties to back his stability-focused agenda.
So he used his competence to just bypass the normal political chaos?
Precisely. He shifted the entire Italian conversation from polarized conflict to, just delivering on concrete things like vaccines and economic recovery. It was a crisis moment where stability beat everything else.
So, if Draghi shows how powerful that technocratic authority can be, why can't Poilievre just frame Carney as an Italian-style accident who'll fail when the crisis is over? What are the limits of that analogy?
The limits are crucial because they show Carney's position is actually much stronger than Draghi's ever was.
How so?
Well, Italy's system has, constant coalition chaos, frequent government turnover. It actually creates space for these kinds of interventions from outside the normal political machine. Draghi was essentially appointed.
Right, like a corporate turnaround CEO parachuting in.
Exactly. Canada's Westminster system just doesn't work that way. Leaders have to win their party leadership, then they have to win a national election. Carney dominated an internal race and then won a fierce campaign. He wasn't appointed by consensus. He won the right to govern.
Which makes his mandate fundamentally stronger.
Much stronger.
So that leaves the conservatives with a critical question. If pure populism has a ceiling, and they can't just wait for Carney to fail, what's the path forward?
The academic strategy being proposed is a synthesis called technopopulism. The goal is to evolve past just being anti-elite. It's about reframing elite credentials, not as some social status, but as tools deployed for the average citizen.
So leveraging expertise to solve the very problems that fuel populist anger.
That is the heart of it. A leader's expertise has to become a concrete tool for fixing the affordability crisis, the housing shortage. The narrative has to shift from "we fight the elite" to "these credentialed technocrats still haven't fixed housing."
So populist goals, but with technocratic means.
Yes.
The sources suggest they need a very specific profile for this, what they call a Dodge-like leader. Tell us who David Dodge is and why that profile is seen as the antidote.
David Dodge is a figure of immense competence. He was Deputy Minister of Finance in the 90s when Canada eliminated its deficit, then later Governor of the Bank of Canada. He holds a Princeton PhD in economics.
Okay, so why does that specific profile matter so much right now?
Well, a leader like Dodge could do three things instantly. First, they'd recapture moderates and older voters. Second, they can challenge Carney on his own turf. The debate becomes competing visions of governance Carney stimulus versus, say, Dodge's fiscal discipline.
It's competence versus competence.
Right. And third, they bring that international credibility you need to handle the Trump era. You're substituting one brand of high credibility governance for another, not just ceding the entire competence argument.
That makes perfect sense. So what does this all mean for us, in the immediate political moment?
The core lesson here is that in times of crisis, people are torn. They feel the populist impulse, which validates their anger, and the technocratic impulse, which demands competence. And pure anti-establishment rhetoric just hits a ceiling when voters feel like they're facing an existential threat.
And the immediate implications are playing out right now. Those two defections. They leave Carney just one seat short of a majority.
And if just one more conservative MP crosses the floor, he has that majority, which would likely mean no elections for a while.
Right, which gives Poilievre's rivals inside the party a ton of time to organize against him before that January leadership review.
It's a perfect political feedback loop. The perception of weakness triggers departures, and those departures deepen the weakness.
So what's the final thought for us to mull over?
The fundamental question for the conservatives in Calgary isn't whether they can out-populist Mark Carney, his credentials kind of immunize him from that. It's whether they can present an alternative vision of expert governance with comparable credibility. Fiscal discipline over stimulus, for example. Without that evolution toward what we're calling technopopulism, that 41% popular vote ceiling will remain very firmly and very frustratingly intact.